All right, thanks so much for joining me again. I did a video recently on sort of what I called the magical Dorico Cubase import-export. And the idea there was to use some different features in Dorico and Cubase to make getting a full score from Cubase, or sorry, from Dorico into Cubase in some sort of form that would really work well for production purposes and also save a lot of time. But at the core of that was the Project Logical Editor, which is a feature in Cubase that allows you to automate all sorts of stuff with your MIDI. And it's a very effective tool, but I think it's also a little bit obscure. It also relies, my methodology relies on this feature called Dissolve Part, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit, as well as using the Project Logical Editor. So let's talk a little bit, just as an example, of what I'm trying to do here so that you can see if this would apply to you. I'm going to take myself off the camera here. And I've just got this, this is not a simple MIDI score to export into Cubase, but let's just play a little bit. All right, so I've got some brass, I've got winds, I've got quite a bit of percussion, I've got a full string section in here. For me to get this out of Dorico and into Cubase should, generally to get it in very basic way, it's going to be fine. I'm going to do an export from Dorico and import into Cubase, but are all of my articulations going to be preserved? Are all my dynamics going to be preserved? What about, is this going to be playing back through, am I going to have to spend, an hour and a half loading up instruments in Cubase or copying MIDI onto single articulation tracks in my template? These are the kinds of problems that I want to overcome. So let's just kind of walk through this step by step so you can see exactly how this is going to work. I'm going to export this sketch. I think I've done this maybe before, maybe not. So now I'm going to close up Dorico, get rid of that. And I am using VE Pro. So I use Vienna Ensemble Pro for this for a number of reasons. Vienna Ensemble Pro has some advantages in terms of just my instruments are always open, and that smooths out my workflow. But in this particular workflow, it's particularly valuable because Cubase is going to talk to VE Pro, and it's going to get exactly the same sounds, exactly the same articulations. Everything's the same, so right? So it's not like I had an instrument loaded in Dorico, and then I have to load that same instrument with the same articulations and configuration in Cubase, because Dorico talks to VE Pro, and then Cubase talks to VE Pro. But there's only one VE Pro, so if I set up the articulations correctly in VE Pro, and I set my levels, my volume, all that stuff is preserved whether I'm working in Dorico or Cubase. So I recommend doing this with VE Pro. I don't think you'd really have to, but I am doing a demonstration where that's the assumption. So I'm going to load up Cubase here, and we will just wait for it. It's loading up there behind me. And what we're going to do here is we're going to import the MIDI that we had exported from Cubase, or sorry, from Dorico, and we're going to see what it gives us. It's not all that, it's not really a perfect product. Now, this brings me to my first step, which is I've actually created this template, which I just called Dissolvable. And I may share this at a future point in time, or at least at the very least go over how I created it. But the idea of what I call dissolvable is that we can use this Cubase feature called Dissolved Part or Dissolve Part. That's going to help us parse our Dorico stuff into Cubase in the best possible way. So dissolvable is a word that I've used to just kind of help myself keep track of which templates do what. This dissolvable template has a bunch of VE Pro instances. For all of these instances up here, woodwinds, brass, percussion, those are all groupings of instances in VE Pro that represent my family of instruments, and they are connected within this template. So I'm going to go ahead and just create this template or create a new project from this template. There's not really a whole lot to it. There's just, whatever 7 VE Pro instances. That's it. Now I have some folders in here. They're all empty, but they help me organize my import. And then over here on the right, as you can see, I've got a bunch of VE Pro instances that are just connected up by default. And now I can do my import. I can see what I got. And let's see what my import winds up being. I'm going to zoom out here. Oh, there it is. I can see it all over here. Okay, so this is the MIDI that I got, and it's just grouped by track, right? So I've got flutes, oboes, clarinets. That's helpful, but it doesn't tell me what are the negative track delays in here. It doesn't tell me which of these notes are staccato or legato or natural. All the articulations are lost. And right now, when I press play, of course, nothing plays because it's not connected to any instruments. So this is an example of why you want to use the Project Logical Editor, because the project logical editor can manipulate all these things just like that for you if you know how to set it up. So I'm going to show you how I've set up a bunch of Project Logical Editor presets. And the first topic we're going to cover here is tidying up this MIDI import. So how do we tidy up this MIDI import with a PLE or Project Logical Editor preset? So I have on my button, or on my Stream Deck over here, a button which is labeled Dissolve Imported Parts. And watch what happens to my MIDI. I'm going to take myself off the camera. When I hit this button, I get this little window. It's pulling up this dissolve part, which is in the MIDI menu. There's literally a function called dissolve part. I've just incorporated this into a macro. So I'll explain that a bit more in depth in just a minute. So I uncheck optimize display. What that means is that, like this empty MIDI over here, it would just start the MIDI part there. So in other words, it would break my MIDI parts up into multiple parts, optimizing the display so that there's no dead space. I don't like that, so I uncheck that. And you definitely want to use dissolve part by separate channels. Now watch this process. Okay, so suddenly I have 1,000 million tracks here. What's going on? Well, it's divided these out into all of my different articulations. So for example, right here we've got a violin, cello in two different articulations. Actually, there's a third articulation up here. So we can see MIDI notes, but I've got a lot of empty stuff here, and that's because Dorico has sent Cubase information about articulations even if they weren't used, and that's why I've got about I guess 16 tracks for each. You know, I've got violin 2 1 through 16, I've got violin 1 1 through 16, Piatti 1 through 16, right? So this is very helpful. The MIDI dissolve part up here, this is where it is, dissolve part. That's a very helpful tool for dividing this up. But right now, this still isn't useful. It's still not playing anything. And although it has divided things up by articulation, that hasn't actually meaningfully improved my workflow yet. So the next thing we want to talk about is how the Project Logical Editor can be used to automate this task. Let's go up to the Project menu in Cubase, go down to the Project Logical Editor, and go to Setup. Okay. Now, when I go in here to my own Dorico workflow, my, let's see, process import, I think is what it's called. Delete empty parts, dissolve imported parts. Let's see what this looks like. So I have this tidy flag events, which was my own Project Logical Editor preset that I made that removes little parts of MIDI at the beginning of each track. It's not too important. Then it runs that MIDI, actually what it does, first of all, is it identifies MIDI parts in my project. That's all that this does here. And it selects them down, oops, sorry, I'm sorry for the zoom. It selects them because I have select chosen here. And after it's done that, it does the post-process commands. So it does the pre-process commands before it does the selection. And then after it's selected, it does the post-process commands. Those are to dissolve the parts, and then edit, delete, and then the Process Logical Editor delete empty tracks. So The delete basically deleted my original tracks. You'll notice that although I've got a million tracks here, it actually deleted the original import. So that's what the delete did down here. And then the delete empty tracks has basically, well, just deleted any empty tracks, but many of these tracks are not actually empty. And although these MIDI parts are empty of MIDI notes, they do have CCs in them, right? This is my dynamics. This is CC1 and CC11, which is the dynamics from Dorico based on my expression map. And that's important information. So although it's not important information on these tracks with no notes, it is very important on these tracks that do have notes. So I'm glad that that's preserved, and it means essentially that my dynamics from Dorico, where I've carefully put in piano and mezzo forte and created hairpins and crescendos and all that stuff, that all of that stuff's been preserved in CC1 and CC11 because those are the CCs I have configured in my expression maps. Okay, but I do want to get rid of all of this stuff. So I'm going to use let's see, I'm not sure if it's a macro at this point. It's not a macro yet. I have these two macros I've created here called connect outputs, which is going to connect them ultimately to my VE Pro instance. And then I've got another one here at the bottom called renaming instruments. You'll see what those do. But the next thing I'm going to do is my delete parts button is the second button on my Stream Deck. And I guess that must go to this. Here we go. Sorry, I've distilled this all down to just 3 buttons on my Stream Deck. I hit them one after another and it does the job. So I have to remind myself how some of this stuff actually works. Okay, so again, this is looking for parts that are empty. But as we said, these parts with MIDI CC, even though they don't have any notes, Cubase is not going to call them empty because they do have MIDI CC. So before I do that, I have to select all and then extract MIDI. What extract MIDI does, that is just up in the MIDI menu here. Extract MIDI under maybe functions. There it is. Extract MIDI automation. What that does is it's going to basically take the MIDI and it's going to write it to an automation track instead. It's still going to be preserved that it was CC1 or CC11, but it's going to remove it from the MIDI part. And by doing that, it's going to make these MIDI clips empty. So then I'm going to, the post process again is to delete the empty parts and to delete empty tracks. So when I push the second button on my Stream Deck, it fires this thing here. And let's check out what that does. Just make sure this window's in focus. And that's what I have now. So now what I've got is only tracks with actual MIDI in them. And you can see that in some of these cases, I would have a CC preserved if there had been MIDI CC in that track, then it would be preserved as an automation track. Now I have a very simple display. Each one of these tracks represents an instrument, right? They're colored. All the flutes are purple, or all flute 1, all flute 2 is this. And the reason they're separated into tracks is because these are actually separate articulations. Now over here where it says flute 1-1, what that means really, I know, is that it's flute 1, but the second one here indicates that it's on channel 1. This is on channel 3, this is on channel 5, and I've used channel switches, which I might cover in a future video. Channel switches in Dorico instead of key switches. So I know everything that's on channel 1 is actually natural. Everything on channel 3 is a type of legato. Everything on channel 5, I think, is staccato, and so on and so forth. So these numbers, I actually have another Project Logical Editor preset that'll go ahead and sort all that out and rename it. But what I have now, after pressing my first 2 buttons, is all my MIDI from Dorico. This is my full arrangement. So the final button is to organize and connect these tracks. So the organizing is going to rename them, and it's also going to connect them up to these VE Pro instances. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click that button. And what we'll see here is under routing, for example, let's find one. There is an example right here where you can see now all of those ones and zeros. The channels have been preserved. I can see them in the drop-down boxes here. But now those numbers have been changed to things like sustain, staccato, legato. So I can see what these tracks are. And it's like now I've got this single articulation track structure that we all like in our Cubase template. And that happened, that was renamed by a PLE or Project Logical Editor preset. Now, you'll also see on this track that up here in routing, it has been correctly routed to my VE Pro Brass, which is right here under plugins. This is one of the instances from my Cubase rack, and it's connected it up correctly on channel 1. Sorry. Now this staccato, for example, is on channel 4. So when we look at that, we can see that it's also connected to port 1, which is my horn 1 instrument, but channel 4. So when I play these back, I'm hearing exactly the same instrument playback from VE Pro. And it's playing exactly the right articulations using the channel switches that I had used. Now, the next question is, what about negative delay? Well, if we look at our MIDI here, our MIDI is on the grid, but I actually usually use, I think that project that I had there was an old project, but I actually set the negative delay in Dorico, which I'll show you how you can do that. Let's see here. Let me bring up Dorico. Dorico won't play back in this case because VE Pro is already connected to Cubase, but I can show you what the expression maps look like. So let's look at horn 1. Okay. So under legato, for example, I have a minus 40 millisecond delay. Under marcato, I have a minus 40 second delay. And you'll notice that I'm using channel switches. Marcato goes to channel 6. Legato goes to channel 2. These delays are hard baked into my MIDI export. So if I go to the legato values here, cancel and close this up. If I go to the horn 1 legato here, the way that I have it named, I actually have an alternate legato. We could use the sustain too, I believe. That has this a similar delay. We'll actually see that not all these notes, oh sorry, I'm sorry for the problem here. Not all these notes are perfectly quantized. So you can see, let's see if I can. You can see that if I were to quantize this note, watch this start number right up here. If I were to quantize this note, let's say to the nearest 16th note, right? If I were to quantize that, it went to 3.3.1.0. It was at 0.7. So that's the equivalent of a minus 40 delay compensation that I set up in, I'm sorry, I realize now I'm on the screen. Let me just demonstrate that again. So we're looking at this number here, this note, and the reason this is a 7 and not a 0 is because this is not quantized. It's actually incorporating a hard-baked negative delay compensation from Dorico's articulation. And to prove it, if I quantize this, you see that it goes to 0. I just quantized that note. So all the quantization here has hard-baked, let me put that a clearer way. My negative delay has been hard-baked into this MIDI import, which means that all of this MIDI is following my negative track delays correctly. So let's look a little bit at how this got connected up in the I/O, right? So I'm going to want to figure out, how did my horn get connected to ProBrass port 1 and channel 1? So I'm going to go again up to Project Logical Editor Preset. I'm going to go to Settings here, and I'm going to look at my preset called Connect, and I'm going to look at the one that is Connect Horn 1. Okay, so what does it do? It finds any track that's called Horn F-1, that's my Horn 1. Doesn't have any pre or post commands. But this down here, instead of being set to select, is set to transform, which means it's going to operate these items here. And what's it doing? It's connecting the output, and I could select from all of my ProBrass VE Pro strings. These are all of these racks right here. I choose the input, and then you always want parameter 2 to be off. That is important so that these channel settings don't change. I really like it. Won't it may not destroy the MIDI, but it does make it gives me less visibility. I like being able to look at this and remember, oh yeah, my forte piano and sforzandos are always on channel 15. I like to be able to see that visibility. So that is how we connect, and also how we ensure the negative delay is working. Now, in terms of colors, you can also set colors with a PLE preset. I have made some other presets, the renaming ones here. Let's take a look at that. It basically takes something like Horn F space 1 and replaces it with Horn F hyphen 1. And you have to do that because otherwise it would construe this 1 as meaning that it's on channel 1, the channel indicator, or the indicator of my articulation. Once I change it to hyphen 1, it means that all of these little names in parentheses, like legato and sustain and so on and so forth, will be preserved. Okay, so it's a little bit fiddly. I'm sure you can appreciate that, but I'm sure you can also appreciate from watching this that once you set these up, and my recommendation is set them up on some Stream Deck buttons, you're all done. So just as a quick demo, once again, I'm going to close this up, and I'm going to show you what my workflow really feels like. Okay, so we're going back to the very beginning of this project, and I am going to go, okay, import, MIDI file, no, MIDI file, import it. We've got all this stuff. I'm going to hit the first button. All right. Sorry about that. Oh, I just had it on a different screen. Okay, so I've just imported. I hit my first button, dissolve. I uncheck this. I hit process. I get all this stuff. I hit my second button, delete empty parts. I hit my third button, organize and connect tracks. And now I'm ready to play. So I'm done. That's how quick this is once you have all the Project Logical Editor presets in place, once Dorico's expression maps are set up with your negative delays and set up with channel switches instead of key switches. You'll notice I have no key switches in any of this MIDI, so I don't have any weirdness going on. And it's literally, if you're using VE Pro, it's literally connecting to exactly the same sample with all of the exact same details in VE Pro. So I know that my playback in Cubase, I know, is exactly the same as my playback was in Dorico. But from here, I can do whatever I want in Cubase, work with audio, warp it to match edits on a TV show, double some of these instruments out to synths, or use other textural instruments that I wouldn't normally use in Dorico. effects, processing, mixing, mastering, all that stuff that Cubase is so good at. If you have any questions about any of this, please do post in the comments. I'm going to make some more videos and kind of create a series that would help anybody understand how to really make the most of this workflow. I think it's really made a big difference for me, and I'm more than happy to share what I've learned. So I'll be doing videos anyway on a regular basis covering topics related to this, but I'd love to hear questions in the comments so that I can target specific questions as well in the videos. Thank you so much for supporting my channel. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that I see you again soon. Thanks so much. Bye for now.